I want to break down what are the 5 teams this season that potentially pose the biggest threat to Kansas City's three-peat. I want to start off with the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans are going to be one of the most well-balanced teams in the NFL this year. They're going to have a great offense. They're going to have outstanding defense. They can get after the quarterback. You got Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson. Derek Stingley could potentially be an all-pro defensive player of the year candidate this year. And with how good you're going to be on both sides of the football, Kansas City is a team that, if you're Houston, really frightens you because you have a quarterback in C.J. Stroud that you know his defense can slow down Mahomes in the fourth quarter and get him the ball back, and you can trust him to lead you downfield to beat Kansas City in the playoff game. Another team that I believe poses a huge threat to Kansas City being able to three-peat this year are the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers, with how hot they ended off last year, Jordan Love having a 20-3 touchdown ratio the last 2 months of the year, that's not luck. It's not about how you start. It's about how you finish. And you want your quarterback to be playing their best football near the tail end of the season. With how good Jordan Love was during the Packers playoff run last year, I expect that to carry over into this year. You got one of the youngest wide receiving corps in the league with a lot of talent, a lot of depth. You don't have nobody that's elite, but you have guys who are good enough to get it done. And defensively, you finally have fixed your liability of a defense because you got a new defensive coordinator now and Jeff Hafley, who you hired to replace Joe Barry. If Green Bay's defense was just average last year, they would have been in the NFC Championship last year playing against the Detroit Lions. Another team that I believe poses a huge threat to Kansas City's three-peat is the Joe Burrow, or the Patrick Mahomes stopper, that is Joe Burrow is the only active quarterback that has a playoff win against Patrick Mahomes. He has the recipe to going on the road and winning an Arrowhead. And with him being healthy this year, if you're a Chiefs fan, the last quarterback you want to see in the postseason is Joe Burrow. Because Joe Burrow is the Patrick Mahomes stopper. He's like what Eli Manning was to Tom Brady. Even though he's not as talented as Patrick Mahomes, you know that for some reason, he always has the slight edge when he goes up against Kansas City because he actually shows up in the fourth quarter. Even though Joe Burrow statistically hasn't looked that great in these playoff games, he always is able to make big plays when they matter the most late in the game in the fourth quarter, which is what you have to be able to do when you're going up against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. They also are going to have a defense that's going to be good enough to slow down Kansas City's offense again. Last year, their defense was as bad as what it's ever been under defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. You revamped that interior defensive line. You got some veterans in the secondary now. Look out for Cincinnati this year if you're the Chiefs. The Baltimore Ravens. I know that Lamar choked in the fourth quarter of last year's game. He threw that interception, the triple coverage. But what often isn't remembered from that game is that before Lamar threw that interception, Zay Flowers fumbled away a touchdown that would have made it a one-score game. And then he also had a costly taunting penalty late in that same matchup as well. If Zay Flowers never fumbles against those taunting penalties, that's a way different game than what the final score says. Lamar has the talent to be able to take down Patrick Mahomes. With him right now, I just think it's a mental thing with him. And once he finally is able to get over the mental barrier that he has when it comes to the fourth quarter against Mahomes, then he'll be able to get over the hump and he'll be able to deliver a Super Bowl to Baltimore. And with how talented Baltimore is this year, they pretty much are the most talented team in the AFC this year. They're not as complete as what the Texans are because they got concerns on their offensive line. And I believe that the Texans defense this year is slightly more talented than Baltimore's. Plus, they lose their DC to Seattle. But with Derrick Henry, he's going to be the great equalizer for that squad this year. Last year, a big piece for why they didn't make it past Kansas City was because they didn't run the football that much. They only gave their running backs 5 carries in that game. With Derrick Henry at running back, he's going to be somebody who you can rely on to take some of that pressure off of Lamar's shoulders in these big playoff games if they do have to go on the road and face off against Patrick Mahomes this year again. Now with Derrick Henry, you can build your offense around trying to keep Patrick Mahomes off the field instead of having this mentality that we got Lamar Jackson, we're going to ask him to go toe-to-toe straight up with Mahomes, and we're just going to air it out. Baltimore isn't a team that's equipped to win games just by relying on Lamar Jackson's arm. Not saying he's not a good passer, but when Baltimore is at their best, it was with them being able to play complementary football. For as good as what Lamar was last season, it's easy to forget that they still were top 3 in the NFL in rushing yards per game. That is the identity of the Baltimore Ravens, being able to be dominant on the ground. And with Derrick Henry, that's what makes them such a big threat still to the Kansas City Chiefs. And the last team are the Los Angeles Chargers. The Los Angeles Chargers aren't as talented as the Texans, Packers, Bengals, or Ravens, but what they do have that poses a threat to KC is them having a new head coach in Jim Harbaugh. And Jim Harbaugh has won everywhere he's been. San Francisco, Michigan. He's always delivered. It's not a matter of if he's going to succeed in Los Angeles. The question is, how fast is he going to be able to turn around this team and make them a Super Bowl contender? I don't think they pose a threat to Kansas City in the playoffs, but they do pose a threat to Kansas City in terms of being able to win the division. Because when you're able to consistently win your division, you guarantee yourself a home field playoff game. Now, if you don't get the 1 seed, it still helps your chances of being able to make it to the Super Bowl because when you get to play a playoff game in the wild card round, it's a huge benefit to you. Think about when they beat Miami last year. If Kansas City never won the AFC West last year and they have to go on the road to play the Dolphins in Miami, do you still believe they win that game? It's a way different game because Miami, with them having to travel on the road to Arrowhead, it put them at a disadvantage because it exposed their biggest flaw. They can't play in harsh weather conditions and the cold. They're not a physical football team. And to win in cold weather games, you got to be physical. And that's why home field advantage for Kansas City means so much. If you don't have that and you got to go on the road and all your playoff games, your road to the Super Bowl becomes increasingly more difficult than what it would be with you having that home field playoff game that you get from winning the division. So these are the 5 teams that I believe pose the biggest threat to the Kansas City Chiefs being able to three-peat this year. Leave your comments down below. I'm eager to hear what you guys got to say.